I thought a simple visit to the clinic would be just that, until it revealed my wife's darkest secret. What followed was a shocking revelation of lies: a trial, community service, a penal colony, a mental hospital. What awaits the wife? My name's Adam, and I've been married to Jessica for almost 7 years. We have a 3-year-old son, Leo. To anyone on the outside, we probably looked like the perfect family: steady marriage, happy kid, no real drama. And for most of those 7 years, I thought we were solid. I thought I knew the person I was married to. But as I've recently found out, I couldn't have been more wrong. It started on what was supposed to be a routine clinic visit for Leo. He'd been having these ear infections that kept coming back, and finally, the doctor recommended we see a specialist. Jessica and I agreed to both go with him to the appointment. We wanted to make sure we were getting the best care and to ask all the right questions. We arrived at the clinic, checked in at reception, and took seats in the waiting area. Leo was busy playing with his toy truck, and Jessica was tapping away on her phone. Nothing unusual. When our turn was called, I expected we'd all go in together, but right then, Jessica stood up and said she had to make a quick phone call. She told me to go ahead with Leo and that she'd join us in a minute. It seemed a little strange, but I didn't think much of it at the time. We've all had those moments when we have to handle something last minute, right? So I picked up Leo, told him we were going to see the doctor, and headed into the exam room alone with him. As I sat there waiting for the doctor, I found myself wondering what could have been so important that Jessica would step away right then. But the thought slipped from my mind as the specialist came in and began discussing Leo's condition. As the doctor examined Leo and explained the treatment plan, I kept glancing toward the door, expecting Jessica to walk in any second. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I tried to focus on what the doctor was saying, but my mind kept wandering back to Jessica. Where was she? The clinic wasn't that big, and whatever call she'd needed to make shouldn't have taken this long. When the doctor wrapped up and handed me some paperwork, I checked my phone, hoping maybe she'd texted with an update. But there was nothing, no message, no missed call. Leo looked up at me, a bit tired from the examination, and I realized he was starting to sense my unease. We walked back out into the waiting area, but Jessica was nowhere in sight. I scanned the hallways, expecting her to pop around a corner or finish her phone call any moment. Still nothing. I decided to ask the receptionist if she'd seen Jessica around, just to ease my mind. She gave me a polite, puzzled look and shook her head. Sorry, I haven't noticed her leaving or anything. I took Leo over to the little play area and tried to distract myself, but something gnawed at me. I'd been married to Jessica long enough to know her usual habits. She wasn't the type to leave us hanging without a reason. Just as I was getting up to go look for her, Jessica appeared from around the corner, casually tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She greeted me with a quick smile and said, "Sorry about that, I grabbed a coffee at the cafe down the hall. I needed a pick-me-up." I stared at her, feeling a pang of confusion. A coffee break? We were here for our son's appointment, and instead of being with us, she'd wandered off to grab a coffee. Something about it didn't sit right. This wasn't like Jessica. I knew she loved her coffee, but this wasn't the time or place to relax with a latte. I tried to brush it off, but a part of me was unsettled. "You missed the whole appointment," I said, keeping my voice even. The doctor went over Leo's treatment plan. It seemed important that we'd both be there. She laughed it off lightly. "Oh, come on, Adam, you know how these checkups go. I knew you'd handle it. Besides, I was only gone for a few minutes." I wanted to press her on it, ask her why she disappeared for so long, but something held me back. She looked so calm, so sure of herself, that I felt ridiculous for doubting her. So I let it go, convincing myself that maybe I was overreacting. 2 weeks went by, and life returned to its usual rhythm. I tried to shake off the strange feeling from the clinic visit, chalking it up to my own overthinking. Jessica acted as though nothing unusual had happened, and, in her usual way, was focused on our day-to-day life with Leo. Just as I was starting to let go of that unsettling experience, Jessica dropped a bombshell. One evening, as we were wrapping up dinner, Jessica looked at me with a hint of a smile and said, "I've got some news." I set down my fork, curious. "What's up?" She took a deep breath, her eyes gleaming. "I'm pregnant, Adam." I blinked, trying to process what she'd just said. Pregnant? We hadn't been planning for another child, or even discussing it recently. A mix of emotions flooded me, surprise, excitement, confusion, but mostly, I felt off balance. This news seemed to come out of nowhere, just like her strange behavior at the clinic. "Wow. I didn't expect that," I said, forcing a smile. "But that's amazing, Jess." She beamed at me, her hands absently resting on her stomach. "I know it's sudden, but I really think this is going to be wonderful for us." I nodded, trying to wrap my head around it. But deep down, that nagging feeling from the clinic came rushing back. 3 or 4 months passed, and Jessica's pregnancy seemed to be progressing well. She was constantly visiting the clinic for her checkups, sometimes even twice a week. I didn't question it much at first. After all, every pregnancy was different, and if the doctors thought she needed regular monitoring, I was happy she was being cautious. But as time went on, something about her appointments began to feel off. Whenever I asked her about the visits, she kept it vague, brushing off my questions with a simple, "Everything's normal," or "just the usual checkup." She'd give me a quick smile, reassuring me it was nothing to worry about. It was strange, though, that she wouldn't share any details. In her last pregnancy with Leo, she'd been eager to talk about every little thing, the ultrasounds, the doctor's advice, every symptom she was experiencing. Now, it felt like she was holding back, deliberately keeping me out of the loop. Part of me wanted to push for more, to go with her and hear everything from the doctor myself. But I didn't want to come across as overly controlling or paranoid. So, once again, I held back, trying to trust her judgment and let things unfold naturally. Still, that nagging feeling from the clinic visit months ago had never fully gone away. And each silent checkup only made it grow stronger. Leo's treatment had been going well, and we were finally at the end of his visits. The doctor wanted one last follow-up, so Jessica and I took him to the clinic that afternoon. It felt like any other appointment, until we walked through the lobby doors. As soon as we checked in, Jessica turned to me and casually mentioned she needed to use the restroom. We still had about 30 minutes before our scheduled time, so I didn't think much of it. "All right, go ahead. I'll wait here with Leo," I said, watching as she headed down the corridor. But as she disappeared around the corner, a feeling I couldn't quite name crept over me. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. After all, she was pregnant, of course she needed the restroom more frequently. But that odd feeling, the one that had been lurking since her last unexplained visits, was back, stronger than ever. After a moment, I glanced over at Leo, who was happily absorbed in the playroom nearby, and quietly told him, "I'll be right back, buddy. Just stay here for a minute, okay?" He nodded, lost in his toys, as I slipped down the hallway after Jessica. I followed her path carefully, keeping my distance as she moved down the corridor. But instead of heading into the restroom, she took a turn and walked into one of the offices near the end of the hall. I stopped in my tracks, watching her as she disappeared behind the door. A knot formed in my stomach. Maybe she had a quick checkup that she hadn't mentioned. It would be unusual not to tell me, but with her pregnancy, maybe she thought it wasn't worth mentioning every little detail. I stood there for a few moments, debating whether to leave it alone. But my instincts wouldn't let me walk away. Heart pounding, I took a step toward the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. I hovered outside, unsure if I should knock, wait, or just head back to Leo. But something inside me demanded to know what was going on. Taking a breath, I reached for the handle, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. I pushed open the door, and the scene before me hit me like a punch to the gut. Jessica was sprawled on the clinic's small couch, her blouse disheveled, her hair a mess. Leaning over her was a young doctor, his hands braced on either side of her as if they were the only two people in the world. For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. My wife, pregnant with what I thought was our child, wrapped up in an embrace with another man right here, in a clinic we trusted for our son's care. As the shock wore off, anger took its place, and before I knew what I was doing, I lunged forward and shoved the doctor off her. He stumbled backward, eyes wide with surprise, but I barely noticed him. My gaze was locked on Jessica, my mind reeling as I tried to make sense of what I'd just seen. "What is going on here, Jessica?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. "You're pregnant. We're here for our son, and you're cheating on me." Jessica's face turned white and she opened her mouth, but before she could get a word out, the young doctor beside me spoke up, his voice filled with confusion and shock. "Wait, Jessica, you're pregnant." He looked between us, hurt spreading across his face. "I thought we were building a life together. Is this baby mine, or your husband's?" Jessica just sat there, staring at us both, completely speechless. It was as if she had finally realized the enormity of what she'd done, yet she couldn't summon a single word of explanation. Her silence told me everything. The doctor's words, "I thought we were building a life together," echoed in my mind, each one like a fresh stab of betrayal. Jessica hadn't just lied to me. She'd been stringing him along, too, with promises of a future that didn't include me or our family. I took a deep breath, barely holding back my fury. "Go home, Jessica. Pack your things and get out of my life." My words were cold, final, and there was no mistaking the anger in my voice. She looked up, eyes brimming with regret, but I couldn't bear to look at her any longer. I turned and walked out, feeling the last remnants of trust and love crumble to dust. After the confrontation, I knew I couldn't keep my son in that tense environment, so I focused on what needed to be done. I took Leo to his doctor's appointment, making sure he didn't sense the turmoil raging inside me. Once it was over, I dropped him off with my parents, explaining briefly that I needed some time to sort things out. They looked at me with concern but didn't press for details, knowing I'd share when I was ready. With Leo safe and away from the chaos, I headed back home, steeling myself to face whatever might come next. I walked through the front door, half expecting to see boxes or suitcases, some sign that Jessica had started packing. But the house was still exactly as I'd left it, and Jessica was sitting on the couch, looking lost. I clenched my fists, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "Why aren't you packing?" I demanded, my voice tight with anger. Jessica looked up at me, her expression a mix of regret and desperation. "Adam, maybe we can work through this. We have a family, and soon we'll have another child. Can't we just try to make things right?" Her words hit me like ice. I felt a wave of anger surge up, almost blinding. "Make things right?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the room. "There's no making things right after what you did. You lied, you betrayed me, and you're sitting here pretending we can just fix it." She flinched but didn't look away. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Mistake?" I spat, my voice rising. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, not starting an affair while you're carrying our child. If you wanted this family, you wouldn't have cheated." Jessica's face crumpled, but I had no sympathy left to offer. "Get up, pack your things, and get out." The betrayal burned deep, and every time I thought back to that moment in the clinic, I felt an overwhelming urge for justice. Jessica hadn't just betrayed me, she'd taken advantage of everything we'd built and thrown it away without a second thought. I decided that if she could deceive so easily, then she should experience what it felt like to be stripped of the life she took for granted. I began my plan with quiet, calculated precision. Jessica was unaware of the steps I was setting into motion, thinking I was simply working through the anger or cooling off. She couldn't have been more wrong. I reached out to my attorney and put together a detailed strategy to ensure that, legally and financially, I would protect myself and our son. First, I froze our joint accounts and transferred the funds to a separate account in my name. I wanted to make sure that the resources I had worked hard to earn would go toward Leo's future, not to fund Jessica's betrayal. I filed for sole custody of Leo and began gathering every piece of evidence I had, from the clinic encounter to records of her appointments and absences. I knew that a judge would take my case seriously with everything laid out so clearly. Next, I reached out to the clinic itself. Since Jessica's affair had happened under their roof, I requested access to their security footage. It was a risky move, but given the circumstances and my connection with the medical team handling Leo's treatment, they agreed to provide it. The footage was damning, undeniable proof of her infidelity and reckless behavior. Then I contacted the father of the young doctor she'd been seeing. Through a bit of searching, I found out that the doctor's family was close-knit and respected in our community. I arranged an anonymous meeting with his father and shared the details of the affair, including the footage from the clinic. I let him know that his son had not only destroyed my family but had also compromised his profession by engaging with a patient's spouse in such a setting. My final step was more personal. Jessica had been counting on me to handle everything financially, so I cancelled her credit cards and withdrew my support from any of her expenses. She would have to figure out how to survive without my help and answer for her choices. And when the divorce papers arrived, with evidence of her affair attached, she'd realized just how much her betrayal had cost her. By the end of it all, I didn't feel the guilt or hesitation I thought I might. This was the justice she'd earned, and as she faced the fallout from her choices, I knew she was finally seeing just how serious her actions had been. With divorce papers filed, I knew the court would soon address the issue of Jessica's pregnancy. Given her affair, I needed clarity on whether the child she was carrying was even mine, and the court would likely require proof of paternity as part of the proceedings. I decided to get ahead of things and arrange for a prenatal DNA test, hoping to uncover the truth before we faced a judge. I called Jessica, keeping my tone steady. "Jessica, we need to confirm paternity before the court date. I've scheduled a prenatal DNA test." For a moment, there was silence on the line. Then, she responded, her voice laced with irritation and defiance. "There won't be a DNA test, Adam. And there won't be a divorce, either." Her refusal stunned me. Even after everything, she still believed she could control the situation, that she could manipulate me into backing down. But I was done playing her games. Keeping my voice calm, I replied, "Then we'll let the court handle it, Jessica. We'll see if you can refuse there." Before I could say anything else, she hung up. Her abruptness only solidified my determination. This was no longer just a matter of ending our marriage, it was about making sure she finally faced the reality of her choices, whether she liked it or not. The day of our first court hearing arrived, and I felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. I'd prepared myself for this moment, knowing that the truth would finally be laid out before us, and that Jessica could no longer dodge the consequences of her actions. As we sat in the courtroom, the judge addressed the matter of her pregnancy. "Given the circumstances, it's clear that a paternity test is essential," he stated, looking over his glasses at Jessica. "This will clarify the child's parentage, which is critical for this case." Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face tightening. Without missing a beat, she responded, "I'm not doing the DNA test, Your Honor." The judge's brow furrowed, clearly puzzled. "Excuse me? Ms. Carlson, are you refusing a court-ordered DNA test?" Jessica's lawyer quickly leaned over, whispering urgently to her, but Jessica shook her head defiantly. For a brief moment, a tense silence settled over the room. It was obvious that her refusal wasn't just confusing, it was beginning to undermine her credibility. The judge's patience was wearing thin. "Ms. Carlson, your refusal raises serious questions. A test is necessary to determine the child's paternity and will affect custody and support decisions. I strongly advise you to reconsider. Her lawyer, clearly exasperated, leaned in again, his face tight with frustration, and whispered more intently. After what felt like a standoff, Jessica finally let out a reluctant sigh, glancing at her lawyer before nodding stiffly. Fine. We'll do the test. With that, the arrangement was set, and the test was ordered. It was only a small victory, but I felt a sense of relief. We were finally a step closer to the truth, and with each passing moment, Jessica's control over the situation was slipping. A week later, the day arrived for the court-ordered DNA test. We drove to the clinic together in near silence, both of us wrapped up in our own thoughts. Once there, I was told to wait in the reception area while Jessica was called back to one of the examination rooms. I sat in the lobby, trying to stay calm, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. The events of the past few months played over and over in my head. I hoped that this test would finally give me the answers I needed to move forward, one way or another. After what felt like an eternity, I saw Jessica leave the examination room, but instead of returning to the lobby, she turned and walked further down the corridor, disappearing around a corner. Confused, I approached the receptionist, who pointed me toward the doctor's office. I found the doctor filling out paperwork at his desk. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep the confusion out of my voice. "What's going on?" "Jessica just went further down the hall after the test." "Is everything all right?" The doctor glanced up and offered a reassuring smile. "Yes, everything's fine. She was just asked to renew her pregnancy certificate while she was here. Nothing to worry about." I nodded, thanking him, but as I walked back to the waiting area, a fresh wave of doubts crept in. If everything was so routine, why hadn't Jessica mentioned anything to me about renewing her certificate? After waiting in the lobby for what felt like forever, I finally saw Jessica return from down the hall and head back into the doctor's office. Time dragged on as I sat there, watching the clock and wondering why things were taking so long. We were supposed to be here for a simple DNA test, yet it felt like she was hiding something behind those closed doors. Eventually, the waiting became too much. I stood up, walked down the corridor, and knocked on the doctor's door, my patience worn thin. When I entered, the doctor looked up with a serious expression, as if he'd been waiting for this confrontation. "When will we be doing the DNA test?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. The doctor sighed, almost as if he pitied me. "Mr. Carlson, please go home. There will be no DNA test today. As for explanations, I'm afraid I can't provide any further details. Everything will be cleared up in court." I stared at him, stunned. "No test? What do you mean?" "We came here for answers." The doctor simply shook his head, maintaining that same unreadable expression. "You'll have your answers, Mr. Carlson. But they'll come through the court." Feeling a mix of confusion and anger, I left the clinic. Jessica's behavior had reached a level of secrecy I couldn't ignore. The clinic visit had only deepened the mystery, and as I walked out, I knew that whatever came next would change everything. The day of the trial finally arrived, and I went in feeling anxious yet ready to finally get the answers I deserved. I was prepared for the court to sort out the paternity test results, but as the proceedings began, I realized there were unexpected developments. The judge started by addressing new circumstances, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. The judge called Jessica to the stand, and she walked up slowly, looking uneasy. The courtroom fell silent as the attorney began his line of questioning, his tone sharp and unyielding. "Ms. Carlson, you've misled the court and, most importantly, your husband. You claim to be pregnant, yet our investigation has revealed that you are not, in fact, pregnant. You've lied about your condition from the beginning, knowing the implications of such a claim." A murmur spread through the room, and I felt my heart drop. I sat there, stunned, as the words sank in. Not pregnant. Jessica's entire story had been a lie. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Every moment of doubt and confusion over the past few months now had a chilling clarity. Jessica sat there speechless, her face pale. The attorney continued, relentless. You knowingly deceived your husband in this court, all while claiming a pregnancy that didn't exist. Your actions not only wasted the court's time but also inflicted unnecessary emotional harm on your husband and child. I could see the judge's expression darkening. He looked directly at Jessica and said, "This is a serious offense, Ms. Carlson. Misrepresenting a pregnancy, especially in the context of a custody and divorce hearing, is a violation of the court's trust. This will be dealt with in a separate trial regarding perjury and intentional deceit." With those words, the judge finalized our divorce, granting me full custody of Leo. Jessica's web of lies had finally unraveled, leaving her without the control she tried so desperately to maintain. As I sat there, processing the revelation, a strange calm settled over me. It was over. Jessica's deceit had been exposed for everyone to see, and she would now face the full consequences. The trial wasn't over for Jessica, but for me, the path forward was clear. I'd been granted the closure I needed, and now it was time to rebuild my life with my son, free from the lies that had once trapped us both. Curiosity and a desire for closure led me back to the courtroom for the final hearing on Jessica's lies. I wanted to witness the end of this saga, to see her face the consequences of everything she'd put our family through. The courtroom was tense as the judge took his seat, ready to deliver the verdict. Jessica stood before the judge, looking far more fragile and vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. The layers of deception had finally peeled away, leaving her to face the consequences. The judge began by addressing the severity of her actions. "Ms. Carlson," he said sternly, "you have committed a serious offense by fabricating a pregnancy and misleading this court and your family. Your actions constitute perjury, fraud, and intentional emotional harm. Given the calculated nature of your deception and the impact it has had on your husband and child, this court has no choice but to impose a punishment fitting the crime." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Effective immediately, you are sentenced to 6 months of community service, with a specific focus on supporting families and individuals affected by betrayal and trauma. Additionally, this court will require you to attend a mandatory counseling program focused on accountability and honesty, to help prevent any future deceitful behavior." Jessica's face went pale as the judge continued. "Furthermore, as part of the restitution for your actions, you will be financially responsible for all court costs associated with the divorce and custody case. This includes reimbursing your husband for any legal fees he incurred due to your false claims. Finally, you are ordered to have no direct contact with your ex-husband outside of arranged visitation for your child, under strict supervision." The courtroom was silent as the weight of the sentence settled over her. The judge's decision was swift and firm, ensuring she faced real consequences for the betrayal and the lies that had torn our lives apart. As I left the courthouse, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't felt in a long time. Jessica would finally face the repercussions of her actions, and I could begin the process of moving forward, free from her lies and manipulation. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in months, I felt that peace was finally within reach. 5 months after the whirlwind of the divorce trial, life had taken a completely unexpected turn, one that I hadn't imagined would happen so soon. Somehow, amid the chaos, I found myself with someone new, a woman who restored my faith in love and honesty. Her presence was a breath of fresh air, something pure and real that I hadn't realized I was missing. Our relationship blossomed quickly, almost naturally. There was no pressure, no games, just two people who genuinely cared for each other, with no hidden motives or lies. And in what felt like a true gift, she was already pregnant, carrying a child that filled us both with a sense of purpose and joy. Unlike the deceit and manipulation I'd experienced with Jessica, this was different. This child was real, and I had a partner who was honest and genuine. It felt surreal. In just 5 months, I had gone from being trapped in a web of betrayal to finding love, happiness, and the promise of a new family. Things unfolded faster than I could have anticipated, and sometimes I struggled to keep up with all the changes, but I welcomed every single one. Meanwhile, Jessica was nearing the end of her probationary period for her community service sentence. I didn't keep tabs on her life, but word got around through mutual acquaintances. From what I'd heard, she was sticking to the court's orders, though it was clear she resented the work and the discipline it required. But then, I heard something that caught my attention, something about her probationary period ending in a rather unexpected way. The details would come soon enough, and I had to admit, a part of me was curious. I had moved on, but it seemed life wasn't quite finished with the lessons Jessica needed to learn. Life had finally taken on a peaceful rhythm. With my new partner expecting our child, I'd been focused on creating a secure and happy home, leaving the painful memories of the past far behind. But then, out of nowhere, news of Jessica came crashing back into my life. A mutual friend reached out, mentioning that Jessica was facing another court case. Wait, what? I replied, completely blindsided. She was already finishing her probation, and as far as I knew, she had been sticking to her community service terms. What could she possibly be in court for now? I asked, bewildered. The friend's tone grew serious. Apparently, there's an accusation from one of the families she worked with, during her community service. The family claims that she hit their child. I stood there in stunned silence, trying to process what I'd just heard. Jessica, who had always been the restrained one, suddenly accused of lashing out in a way I never would have expected. Sure, our marriage had shown me a side of her I didn't recognize, but this was different. This wasn't just deception, this was crossing a line into something dangerous. The shock gave way to concern. As much as I had moved on, I knew this situation was serious. She was already under probation, and if the accusation held up in court, there could be significant consequences. I couldn't believe she had spiraled so far, but it was clear that her choices were catching up with her in a way no one could have anticipated. Curiosity and a lingering sense of disbelief compelled me to attend Jessica's new trial. Despite everything, part of me couldn't reconcile the woman I once knew with the person now facing such serious charges. So, I went, hoping to understand how she had fallen so far. When I entered the courtroom, a tense silence hung over the room. I took a seat in the back, watching as Jessica sat at the defense table, looking drained and visibly anxious. The family accusing her was there as well, seated with a quiet but determined intensity, ready to see justice served. The trial was grueling. Evidence was presented showing the injury to the child, along with testimony from witnesses who had seen Jessica lose her temper. The judge listened carefully, his expression growing graver with each piece of information revealed. The family's attorney painted a clear picture: Jessica had crossed a line, one that could not be ignored. Finally, after hours of testimony and deliberation, the judge announced his verdict. Jessica was found guilty not only of violating her probation but of child endangerment, a charge the court did not take lightly. He spoke directly to Jessica, his tone severe. "Ms. Carlson, your actions display a pattern of reckless and harmful behavior. This court cannot ignore the impact of your choices on those around you, particularly a vulnerable child. Given the severity of this incident and your prior offenses, I hereby sentence you to 3 years in a correctional facility, along with mandatory anger management and psychological counseling. Upon release, you will not be allowed to work with or have contact with children in any professional capacity." I sat there, stunned, barely able to process what I'd just heard. Jessica, who once held a steady life and a family, was now facing years in prison for actions I could never have imagined. This was the harshest sentence I'd expected, and as the reality sank in, I realized that she had finally reached the end of a path she'd carved out with her own choices. I left the courtroom in a daze, feeling a strange mix of finality and relief. Jessica's story had taken a dark turn, but mine was moving forward, and this chapter, full of betrayal, hurt, and now, justice, was finally closed. In the months following Jessica's sentencing, life took on a new, brighter direction. My partner and I celebrated our love in an intimate wedding ceremony surrounded by close family and friends. It was a day full of laughter, joy, and an overwhelming sense of peace. After everything I'd been through, I never imagined finding someone who would love me and Leo with such genuine care. Standing beside her, I felt like I had been given a second chance at happiness, a chance I never thought I'd have. Not long after our wedding, we welcomed a beautiful baby girl. The moment I held her in my arms, I felt an incredible surge of love and purpose. Watching her tiny fingers grasp mine, seeing Leo hold his baby sister, and having my wife by my side, all of it felt like the life I'd always dreamed of. I was no longer looking over my shoulder, haunted by mistrust and betrayal. Instead, I was focused on this new family we were building together, dedicated to making it one of love, honesty, and stability. As the months passed, my wife and I built a home filled with laughter and warmth. Leo flourished, becoming an incredible older brother, always eager to help and protect his sister. I felt pride in the family we had created, a family that thrived in an environment of trust and respect, values I would protect with everything I had. Life finally felt like it was on track, and for the first time in years, I could wake up each morning with a clear mind and a light heart. But the news about Jessica continued to trickle in, and it was hard to ignore. Shortly after her sentencing, I learned from mutual acquaintances that her time in the correctional facility had gone poorly. In her isolation, she had spiraled even further, unable to accept her new reality. She reportedly attempted to harm herself, and the facility's counselors determined she was a danger not only to herself but to others as well. As a result, she was transferred to a mental health hospital, where she was placed under constant supervision. The last piece of news I received was chilling. Jessica was now heavily medicated, her mental state fragile, leaving her in a near-vegetative condition. The strong medications were necessary to prevent any further self-harm, but they had also robbed her of her former self. The once confident, composed woman I had known was now a shadow, existing but not truly living. Sitting with this knowledge was surreal. I never wished harm upon Jessica, despite all she had done. Even in the moments of betrayal, I had held on to some hope that she could find her own path to redemption, that she might serve her sentence, reflect on her mistakes, and eventually attempt to rebuild her life. I thought she might take steps to eventually reconnect with Leo in a healthy, constructive way. But instead, she had let herself fall deeper and deeper, to the point where any chance of a meaningful life, let alone a relationship with her child, was gone. Sometimes, late at night, I found myself questioning everything. How could someone who once seemed so put together fall so completely apart? What had driven her to ruin every opportunity she'd had to make amends? It was a question I might never get answers to. Maybe Jessica's choices had been fueled by an inability to confront her own faults or a refusal to live with the consequences. Whatever it was, her path had diverged so sharply from mine that it felt like she was an entirely different person than the woman I once married. And so, I moved on, knowing that I had done everything possible to give Leo and our new family a stable, fulfilling life. As for Jessica, her story was now a tragic memory, one I would leave in the past. I had to focus on the people who mattered, on the love and family I had built from the wreckage of my previous life. In the end, I found peace, not because I had all the answers, but because I chose to let go. I chose to embrace the present, to cherish my new wife, our beautiful children, and the life we were creating together. Jessica's choices had led her down a path I couldn't follow, but I had found my way forward, and that was all that mattered. The chapter with her was closed, and with it, a new story of love, resilience, and redemption had begun.